about prostitutes.
He married one.
Well,
Mary
probably,
Magdalene,
yeah. I didn't know if he married.
Yeah.
Jesus is a myth.
I'm not Catholic, so that doesn't. I don't,
Okay.
Yeah.
Or Christian.
Historical
Yeah.
figure that's taken from other religions prior to it. It's
That's the story.
That, a prophet who's the son of God, who's resurrected 3 days after being hung on a cross with a head of nails. I mean, a crown of
thorns.
thorn
It's a story. They told a million times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. And then, but I'm definitely sure that there were a whole bunch of guys. I'm 34, so between the ages of 28 and 34, who were going around what's now Israel and all that stuff, saying these fucking Romans, dude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're like, let's get them the fuck out, and at the same time being like, guys, we know about this thing. It's called magic. It makes the bread rise, and it makes the alcohol, turns water into wine.
Yeah.
And then we'd find out 1,600 years later that's called fermentation, and that's yeast. Those are the explanations. Like the miracles of Jesus, they're all very explanatory from a scientific perspective, if you break it down, but they didn't know what was happening 2,000 years ago to explain it.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, some of the things, the miracles of Christ were the fish, the bread, the wine, then the healing ones like the blind being able to see, and then healing people with broken bones and stuff, like making the crippled walk.
Yeah.
So if you broke those down, setting a bone is serious work, because back in the day when Jesus was supposed to, if you broke a bone,
you're done. Yeah,
it's infected.
broken,
you're done. You're lost.
Yeah.
So if there was some guy who learned how to set a bone properly to stop infection, and the body naturally heals out of magic, like billions of years of evolution, but to us, at that time, it was magic. You're like, this fucking prophet knows how to deal with God.
Yeah.
He saved it. And then same thing with the ointments on the eyes that made people bleed. They wrote that he grabbed mud and then rubbed it on his eyes. So if you think about that, there was probably some antimicrobial something to describe if you took a whole bunch of chemicals or organic materials and mixed them together, it would have medicinal properties, and I'm sure it alleviated people's. And you had guys doing this all over the Mediterranean at the time, and you're like, Jesus, we called him Mike, but yeah, Jesus, Then the other ones were the fermentation of turning water into wine. No one knew how to explain that until about until Louis Pasteur, which was only in 1800. No one knew what turned water into wine. So they were like, God, Jesus, magic.
Yeah.
And then leavened bread is the same thing. Yeast causes bread to rise.
Naturally,
then the other one was they didn't understand, or they kind of understood the concepts of reproduction. So then what you could do is take two fish. In the Bible, they said two. It wasn't a fish. They took two fish.
I'm unfamiliar with that story personally.
The story is that there was a wedding or whatever, and Jesus showed up, and then he was like, I can make wine, or turn water into wine, and then, he made bread and fish.
Okay.
So what you do is, he took one loaf of bread and made it into many. He took two fish and made it into many.
Okay.
Anyone who's made sourdough knows that you need the specific yeast inside the ball. Do you know of this?
No.
Any type of whiskey that you have, and any type of sourdough that you have, and there are other types of bread and stuff, the yeast is the original yeast in the dough.
Okay.
So it cultivates and it starts growing. So what you can do is, if you have one ball of yeasty bread, you can take that and divide it up into a whole bunch of other pieces.
And it'll grow.
And then you put that into the flour of the other, and then that little bit of yeast. So with one loaf of bread, you can make 100 loaves of bread.
Jeez.
Because you have one ball of yeast, and you can make it all rise. So that's the first Jesus experiment of explaining how we have yeast to make
How long does that
leavened
typically
bread.
take? Just like exactly.
It's like a day. They exaggerate
yeah.
it in mythological proportions
Yeah,
of saying like he got it magically in one
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
but the story is he had one loaf of bread and you can turn that into many.
Yeah.
And the same thing with like Jack Daniels. or any type of whiskey. It's called like the sour mash,
Wow.
and it's a little bit of the original that has the yeast in it, and then you throw it in, and it reproduces and creates
Interesting.
alcohol. So that's what happens. So it happens with alcohol and bread. So it was yeast, and its fermentation is probably the most important chemical reaction in human history. Besides, there are a few of them: bronze, fire, silicon. But fermentation is there because it was a part of all human culture, which allowed us to be here. And then the other one is food. What's the other one? Oh, the fish. Because the idea of fish was that you could take one or two fish and turn it into many. And that's the idea that if you created they were well, the Fertile Crescent and all that, they had 10,000 years of agricultural understanding, and they understood that if you took some fish, or you put two fish together, they're going to have sex. They didn't know what's happening underwater,
Yeah.
but then they knew that a month later, you would have 10,000 fish.
Popping up.
Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'd be like in a river, be like, where the fuck do these come from? Magic, we don't understand. Be like, because it is magic.
Yeah.
You take two fish or five fish,
To turn into a
throw it in
1,000,
there, and
yeah.
then you have enough fish for a wedding.
Yeah.
And so that's the miracles of Jesus explained through technical terms. But they didn't know the ideas of science and fermentation, biology, reproduction. So they just took all those explanations of natural phenomenon and called it God.
So you believe Jesus was a physical being? Like,
I
just
think that
blown
he
out
was
of
an
proportion?
embodiment of. I'm sure that there were thousands of Jesuses at the time, of people that were non-Roman, who were speaking against Imperial Rome, but also dealing with the tribal cultures of the Mediterranean at the time, because there was a big trading port of lots of religions, lots of people. It was like a big cultural center with political, and economic happenings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because soon after Jesus, that time was the collapse of the Roman Empire. About 100, maybe like 200 years later.
Post-death.
They say 400 years later, with the collapse of Rome was in the year 400 AD or so. But it started crumbling way before that, and read about the time of Jesus a little bit before that. Then that Rome separated, but then so there was the political aspect, and then the cultural political aspect, and the other component would be the explanations of science, and then the other part so it was real people acting politically, real people doing what is it, frontier medicine type stuff, like who had an understanding of an advanced understanding better than, you know what I mean, like the weird
99%
shit that they did of like
yeah.
bleeding people out. They'd be like, this guy actually, the stuff he's doing works. And the other one is the 10,000 years of human oratory tradition that you mentioned, of that it's pretty much just the story of Osiris.
Yeah.
So
Over and
that's
over again, it's
yeah.
recycled,
That's the idea of God and all that, and the religiosity. But then Jesus, I imagine, was just some 28-year-old, some guy between the age of Jimi Hendrix, who was 27,
R.I.P.,
and the age of Martin Luther King, who was, I think, like 36. So between that age is a revolutionary age of where you're dumb enough to do stuff. You're young enough to be stupid, but old enough to actually have a little sense to you.
Yeah.
So I think that that's been the story of mankind throughout history. But in that particular time, we embodied it as Jesus, who is definitely brown and not the white-looking Renaissance guy.
Well, I can actually tell you exactly who that guy is. That's the son of a former pope, the modern day Jesus.
Is it one of them? Yeah.
It was. I think it's a 13th century pope.
I think a lot of those dudes probably had that look at the time.
Yeah.
Long, flowy hair, the
yeah.
beards. Because Jesus his hair is always nice and shiny and glistening. But yeah, that's the reality of it. But like I said, I imagined it was hundreds of people. Like, imagine the Mediterranean. Every 100 miles was another Jesus.
Yeah.
And then one traveler would be like, dude, did you hear about that guy? And like, dude, I heard about him too. Yeah, what's his name?
Jesus of Nazareth,
yeah,
man.
exactly. Yeah. Joe, no.
Turning fish into millions. That's the. I've always wondered, like, I grew up Catholic or Christian, whatever you want to refer it. I don't know what the difference is at this point. But I grew up in that establishment.
Anyone that believes in Jesus is a Christian,
Okay.
and then it went to a Protestant and Catholic, and then there are a whole bunch of other ones,
Okay.
like Orthodox.
Pretty sure my family's I'm pretty sure my family is Catholic.
You're
at the moment.
Catholic,
Yeah, I'm pretty
yeah.
sure. I don't.
If you're in Massachusetts and have
Yeah,
Irish
fair
Irish or Italian blood,
Yeah.
it's Catholic.
Gotcha. I just remember being in Sunday school, man, and I would always like just be like, all right, what the hell is going on right now? I started asking questions, and they didn't like that, but the instructors, and then I was like, why are they getting mad that I'm asking questions? Like, aren't you supposed to ask questions? And then
Yeah.
that was a young age, and then I just rapidly started realizing, like, yo, this is ridiculous
Yeah.
for me, not for everybody. Some
Yeah.
people need beliefs, and I have a belief in something myself. I think but rationally, like, if it's religion's irrational. It's just the belief of we're all scared of what's on the other side, so we need something to
Explain it.
make us cozy, so we don't go crazy and depressed all the time about the fact that we're gonna die one day.
I agree.
And again, that's coming from a person who believes